Welcome back to Raul Effect. If you've been wondering whether no contact truly affects an avoidant, stay with me until the end because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you see silence, healing, and the psychology behind emotional distance. What if the silence you've been afraid of is the very thing that changes everything? What if the person who walked away isn't forgetting you at all, but is only now beginning to feel the weight of your absence? Stay with me because today we're uncovering what really happens inside an avoidance mind after no contact, and why the truth is far different from what most people believe. You reached a point where you stopped chasing. You stopped sending texts, stopped checking in, and stopped trying to persuade them to stay. Yet somewhere, far from where you are now, there may be someone who can't seem to quiet their thoughts about you. Someone who opens your profile late at night, tells themselves to let go, even deletes your number, only to save it again a few hours later. Deep inside, you may already have a feeling about who that person is. Choosing no contact wasn't easy. You walked away even though every part of you wanted to hold on. Since then, you've probably faced moments where the silence felt almost impossible to carry. Doubt begins to whisper that maybe they forgot you. Maybe they never cared the way you did. Maybe if your absence truly mattered, they would have reached out already. But what if that conclusion isn't accurate? What if silence doesn't tell the whole story? What if what's happening beneath the surface is very different from what you've imagined? Today we're exploring one of the most misunderstood parts of relationships, the point when someone with avoidant tendencies finally starts feeling the reality of losing your presence after no contact. This isn't about creating false hope or encouraging manipulation. It's about understanding common psychological patterns that often appear when an avoidant person loses someone who genuinely mattered. Before we continue, recognize something important. If you're listening to this, it means a part of you is still searching for understanding. A part of you still wonders whether the relationship meant as much to them as it did to you. There is nothing shameful about that. Caring about someone isn't weakness. It's simply part of being human. Think about the nights you've stared at your phone, hoping their name would appear. Think about the messages you typed but never sent. Think about every time you resisted reaching out because you knew breaking no contact would only reopen old wounds. That emptiness you've been carrying, that uncertainty that follows you into quiet moments, may feel like the final chapter. But sometimes, it's only the beginning of a much deeper story. One of the biggest misunderstandings about no contact is believing that silence automatically means someone doesn't care. Many people assume that if feelings were real, the other person would immediately come back. Avoidant individuals often don't work that way. For many of them, creating distance isn't proof that they feel nothing. It's often their way of coping with emotions that become too intense. Real intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional closeness can activate fears they've carried for years without fully understanding them. Ironically, the stronger the connection becomes, the stronger their instinct to step away. While you were always available, they may have experienced your closeness as pressure rather than comfort. When you openly expressed love, it may have left them feeling emotionally exposed. So when the relationship ended, they often experienced an immediate sense of relief. The important part is that this relief usually doesn't last. Beneath that emotional distance is often someone struggling with unresolved fears about trust, dependence, and intimacy. Many avoidant people were never taught that deep emotional connection could feel safe. Instead, they learned to protect themselves, stay guarded, and always leave themselves an escape route. As relationships become more meaningful, their automatic response is often to pull away. They convince themselves they're doing fine. They throw themselves into work, hobbies, social activities, or anything that keeps difficult emotions buried. From the outside, it may appear as though they've moved on effortlessly. But appearances can be misleading. Eventually, something breaks through their distractions. It could be a familiar song, a favorite restaurant, a certain fragrance, or simply driving past a place that holds memories of you. Suddenly, everything they've been avoiding begins to return. The person they work so hard not to think about becomes impossible to ignore. This is the stage most people never witness. It's the moment your absence becomes undeniable. The moment distractions lose their power. the moment they begin realizing what your presence actually meant in their life. Before we go further, there's another question that deserves attention because nearly everyone asks it after an avoidant relationship ends. What did I do wrong? You replay every conversation. You revisit old arguments. You scroll through past messages searching for the exact point where everything changed. Your mind keeps insisting that if you could identify your mistake, the breakup would finally make sense. Maybe you think you asked for too much. Maybe you believe you were too emotional, too caring, or too invested. But that story may not be true. The relationship didn't end because you wanted closeness. It didn't end because you shared your feelings or asked for reassurance. It didn't end because you loved deeply. After heartbreak, the mind often searches for someone to blame. If it convinces you that you caused the relationship to fail, it also creates the illusion that you could have prevented it. That gives the brain a false sense of control. Reality is usually far more complex. Many avoidant individuals don't walk away because the other person isn't worthy of love. They leave because genuine intimacy activates emotional wounds they haven't healed. Vulnerability feels unsafe, and maintaining a close relationship requires emotional tools they may never have developed. That doesn't automatically make them cruel or uncaring. More often, it means they're carrying unresolved pain. At some point in their life, they learned that emotional closeness eventually led to disappointment, rejection, or hurt. To protect themselves, their mind adopted one powerful rule: never allow anyone to get close enough to hurt you again. Until those deeper fears are addressed, the same cycle often repeats. Not because every partner is wrong for them, but because remaining emotionally present feels more frightening than walking away. Understanding that truth can help release the unnecessary guilt you've been carrying and allow you to see the relationship through a healthier, more balanced perspective. Then you came into their world. You offered the warmth they had quietly wished for, but never believed they could truly keep. You were dependable. You cared without pretending. You gave them the kind of emotional connection they always claimed to want. Yet instead of feeling completely secure, something inside them became unsettled. Their protective instincts immediately took over. The closer the relationship became, the stronger those defenses pushed back. It's important to understand this. They didn't leave because your love was too much. They pulled away because your love touched wounds they had spent years hiding from. Those are two very different things. Someone with avoidant tendencies rarely walks away because another person lacks value. More often, they leave because the relationship becomes deeply meaningful. You begin to represent everything they secretly long for but don't believe they know how to handle. You symbolize trust, closeness, emotional openness, and lasting commitment. Unfortunately, those are the very experiences their mind has learned to protect itself against. So stop searching your memories for a mistake that was never there. Stop replaying every conversation, wondering if one different message or one different decision would have changed everything. If someone hasn't worked through their avoidant patterns, they can find reasons to leave even a healthy relationship. The problem isn't always the person standing in front of them. Often, it's the unresolved fears they carry within themselves. The moment you truly accept that, your healing begins moving much faster. Your attention shifts away from asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and toward a far healthier question: what kind of relationship do I deserve? The answer is simple. You deserve someone who feels safe receiving your love instead of running from it. Someone who sees commitment as security, not a trap. Someone who chooses to move closer when life becomes emotionally real instead of searching for the quickest escape. Your ability to love deeply is not a flaw. Wanting connection doesn't make you needy, and you were never responsible for another person's inability to receive what you genuinely offered. In a world where vulnerability often feels rare, loving wholeheartedly remains one of the greatest strengths a person can have. Never mistake that strength for weakness. Now let's look beneath the surface of the person who walked away. Not the version they present to everyone else, and not the carefully controlled image they show online. Let's look at what often happens inside them, because understanding that hidden process explains so much of what once seemed confusing. For many people, emotional closeness creates peace. The stronger the connection becomes, the safer they feel. But for someone with strong avoidant patterns, intimacy can trigger the opposite response. As the relationship grows deeper, their internal alarm system begins activating. Their mind starts treating closeness as something risky. Emotional dependence feels dangerous, and every instinct tells them to create distance. This isn't usually a conscious choice. It's a pattern built over many years through painful experiences, disappointments, emotional wounds, and learned survival strategies. Somewhere in their past, opening their heart became connected with pain. Trust became linked to vulnerability, and vulnerability became associated with loss. To avoid repeating that hurt, they built emotional walls designed to keep themselves safe. The problem is, those walls don't recognize the difference between danger and genuine love. They block both equally. As you became more important in their life, those defenses naturally became stronger. At first, it appeared in small ways. Personal conversations suddenly felt uncomfortable. Emotional moments became overwhelming. Conversations about commitment created tension. Before long, their mind began searching for reasons to withdraw. Small imperfections suddenly seemed enormous. They convinced themselves something wasn't right. Feelings that once seemed certain became confusing almost overnight. Often the relationship itself wasn't the real issue. The real challenge was what the relationship required them to experience. Real intimacy demands vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what their nervous system has spent years trying to avoid. Imagine how exhausting that must be. The love they desire most is also the love that frightens them the most. The connection they dream about is the same connection that awakens old fears. So when you offered affection, they didn't always experience it the way you intended. What felt like love from your perspective sometimes felt overwhelming from theirs. Your devotion felt like responsibility. Your emotional honesty felt like expectation. Your desire for closeness unintentionally activated fears they never resolved. That doesn't automatically mean they lacked feelings for you. It means those feelings passed through years of emotional self-protection before reaching the surface. This is why avoidant people sometimes leave relationships that matter deeply to them. Not because they feel too little, but because they feel more than they know how to manage. Instead of facing those emotions, they create distance. Instead of remaining vulnerable, they retreat. You were never the danger. You simply encountered defenses that existed long before your relationship began, and those defenses reacted exactly the way they were conditioned to react. Think back to what happened after the breakup. How many times did you try explaining yourself? How many messages did you send hoping they would finally understand? How often did you try reminding them of what the relationship meant? In many cases, every attempt only pushed them farther away. The reason is surprisingly straightforward. Each effort to reconnect reactivated the same fears that caused them to withdraw in the first place. To their nervous system, renewed contact often felt like renewed emotional pressure, and their automatic response was to create even more distance. This is why no contact can completely change the emotional dynamic. Your silence removes the feeling of being chased. The pressure disappears. No one is trying to force open emotional walls anymore. And within that silence, something important often begins to happen. The internal alarm slowly quiets down. The urge to escape gradually loses strength. The walls they depended on begin softening. With enough time and emotional space, they can finally look back at the relationship without feeling overwhelmed by fear. That's when difficult questions often begin appearing in their own mind. Did I leave too soon? Did I misunderstand what we had? Did I let go of someone who truly cared about me? Your absence gives them something they often couldn't find while the relationship was active. Room to breathe, room to reflect, and most importantly, room to experience their own emotions without immediately feeling the need to run from them. This is the paradox at the center of avoidant attachment. They often distance themselves from the very relationship they have always wanted. Only after enough time and space separate them from it do they begin to recognize what they actually lost. You were never left because you weren't valuable. You weren't abandoned because you failed to love enough. Your honesty, emotional openness, and willingness to build something real challenged a protective system that had been in place long before you came into their life. Now, in the silence you've chosen, They're left with something they couldn't avoid before, their own thoughts. They're alone with the decisions they made, the memories they tried to ignore, and the reflection they can no longer escape. For the first time, they may find themselves asking a question they spent months pushing away. What if leaving was the biggest mistake I made? That question often marks the beginning of an entirely different chapter. But there's another truth that becomes clear only after you've lived through this experience. The person you become during no contact is often far more valuable than the relationship you fought so hard to save. At first, that idea feels impossible. When the breakup is fresh, your attention stays fixed on what's gone. Every day feels defined by their absence. Every memory reminds you of what used to be, and it's easy to overlook the quiet transformation taking place inside you. Without realizing it, you're developing strength, you're building patience, you're learning emotional resilience, you're discovering self-respect. You're proving to yourself that you can stand on your own without believing you've been abandoned. Those qualities aren't created during comfortable seasons of life. They're shaped during uncertainty. They grow in silence. Every time you choose healing instead of chasing, every time you resist the urge to seek validation, and every time you choose your own peace over temporary relief, you're becoming stronger than you were before. Eventually, something unexpected happens. You wake up one morning and realize the pain is no longer controlling your life. The memories may still exist. Certain songs, places, or moments may still remind you of them. But those reminders no longer decide your future. They no longer pull you backward. Instead, your energy shifts toward creating something healthier. You stop trying to recreate the past and begin building a future that reflects the person you're becoming. Perhaps the greatest reward is that your relationships begin changing because you've changed. The version of you that once accepted mixed signals, emotional inconsistency, and constant uncertainty slowly disappears. In its place stands someone who understands their worth, someone who recognizes genuine emotional availability, someone who no longer mistakes attention for love or emotional attachment for true compatibility. Growth naturally raises your standards. It changes what you're willing to accept. It changes what you pursue, what you walk away from, and what you believe you deserve. That's why this journey was never only about another person. Someone else may have started the story, but your own healing becomes its true ending. What first looked like rejection slowly reveals itself as redirection. The experience that once felt like the greatest loss becomes one of your greatest teachers. Life often teaches us through experiences we never would have chosen. The chapters we resist most frequently contain the lessons we need the most. The heartbreak we wish had never happened often uncovers strength we never knew existed. And the doors that close sometimes guide us toward opportunities we would never have discovered otherwise. So if you're living through this season of silence right now, trust that something meaningful is happening beneath the surface. Trust your growth even when you can't fully see it yet. Trust the stronger version of yourself that is quietly emerging one day at a time. You don't need every answer today. You don't need to know how the story ends before taking the next step. You simply need to keep moving forward. One choice, one day, and one small victory at a time. Every step away from emotional dependence moves you closer to freedom. Every step toward freedom brings greater peace. And every step toward peace brings you closer to becoming the person you were always capable of being. One day you'll look back on this chapter with a completely different perspective. Not because it didn't hurt, and not because it was easy, but because it transformed you in ways you couldn't see while you were living through it. It taught you that your worth was never determined by who chose to stay or leave. It reminded you that your value has never depended on another person's ability to recognize it. Most importantly, it revealed that the love, confidence, and security you kept searching for outside yourself had been growing inside you all along. That is the real lesson. That is the transformation. And that is the moment you realize losing someone else was never the end of your story. It became the beginning of finding yourself. If you remember only one thing from this journey, let it be this. Your healing was never supposed to depend on someone returning. The purpose of silence was never simply to make another person miss you. Its deeper purpose was to help you reconnect with yourself. Every time you chose growth instead of chasing, self-respect instead of validation, and peace instead of desperation, you were rebuilding your own life. Whether they come back eventually is no longer the most important question. What matters is that you've rediscovered your value, rebuilt your confidence, and taken ownership of your future. The person who walked away never had the power to define your worth, and they never held your destiny. Carry this truth wherever life leads you. The greatest victory isn't convincing someone else to choose you. The greatest victory is finally choosing yourself. Because once you truly recognize your own value, stop depending on outside approval and build a life grounded in purpose, peace, and self-respect. You become stronger than any disappointment you faced. That is where genuine transformation begins. It's the moment you realize everything you spent so long searching for has been within you from the very beginning. Your healing was never meant to depend on someone else's return. Whether they come back or not, the greatest victory is becoming the strongest, most peaceful version of yourself. If this message helped you see your journey in a new light, subscribe to Kama, and I'll see you in the next video.